Cashflow Diary Podcast, episode 408.
Welcome to yet another exciting episode of the Cashflow Diary Podcast, the podcast that teaches you insider tips, tactics, and strategies for creating leverage streams of cash flow into your life. Learn from top-performing entrepreneurs, business owners, investors, and thought leaders from across the globe as they share their secrets to success. Like what you learn on this and other Cashflow Diary podcast episodes? Go to learninvestingnow.com and sign up to receive powerful tips and information that will help you succeed as an entrepreneur and investor. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, educator, speaker, author, and master facilitator of Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow game, Jay Massey.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Cashflow Diary Podcast. I'm your host, Jay Massey, and I'm glad that you're here today because we are going to, think differently. Specifically, I am not referring to an Apple product today, although I guess it would follow that this company or that company does the same thing as what we're going to be talking about. Here's what I mean. Oftentimes, some of the greatest ideas that you need to be unstuck for your business come from an unknown place. You know, maybe you're watching a cruise ship and you're seeing how many systems that they have running, and there's an idea that that cruise ship is using to run their system that could help you maybe inside your restaurant or laundromat or, short-term rental business or whatever it is that you are doing to build cash flow. Well, the point to that is that I want you to just think about, challenge, if you will, some of the basic things that you've considered to be true, because maybe they're not. And more importantly, they could be the very things holding you back from achieving the next levels of business. Now, with that being said, I've got a guy today who I think is going to be able to help you and I understand that to a completely new level, because he literally wrote the book about it. And what I like about today's guest is the fact that he takes these things, distills them into processes, and helps entrepreneurs and business owners across the globe to be able to go out there and make better decisions, better processes with this information so that we can go out there. Now, who am I talking about? I'm talking about Bryce Hoffman. He's an author, speaker, strategic advisor, management consultant, and what's interesting, he's also a best-selling author. You may have remember him from one of his prior books, but today we're talking about red teaming, how your business can conquer the competition by challenging everything. I completely like that. Now, before we get into this, I want you to be in an open mind, because there may be things you learned today that you did not know were true or you thought weren't true. But more importantly, by being willing to ask the question and listen, today you could finally get that breakthrough. So let's listen to Bryce Hoffman. Bryce, you there?
I am, Jay. Thanks for having me on.
I'm glad that you are here, sir. Thanks for taking the time. Now, this being the first time that you're here, I have to ask you the same question that I tend to ask everybody else. You ready?
I am ready, Jay.
All right. I tend to look at today's entrepreneurs a lot like yesterday's superheroes. You know, Batman, Robin, Wonder Woman, if you will. And I think entrepreneurs and superheroes have a ton of things in common. For example, occasionally as an entrepreneur, we can envision ourselves as, flying around, saving our customers with our products, services, and knowledge, etc., and helping them and improving their life. But also, like a superhero, an entrepreneur has a beginning. So if you think about, say, Peter Parker, there was a time where he was just a college student and he was going to school, trying to get good grades. He had a job to make sure that he could eat some pizza, if you will. Then one day something happens to him. He gets bit by a spider and he has to choose. Hey, I've got this skill set. I want to go out there and serve people. And he's got to choose good or evil. And he obviously chooses good. In this case, as it comes to you, my question is as follows. Before, your books, before your management consulting, before being on all of the radio shows, the BBC, NPR, CNN, Fox, PBS, etc., before all of the things that people know you for today, my question to you is, who is Bryce Hoffman?
Oh, I'm relieved, Jay. I thought you were going to ask me whether I chose good or evil. I hope I chose good.
I'm glad I made it easy for you.
Yeah. Who is Bryce Hoffman? Well, I am a former journalist. I spent 22 years as a financial journalist covering the high-tech industry in California, the biotech industry in the San Francisco Bay Area, and then the automobile industry in Detroit. So I watched booms and busts happen right before my eyes.
Yes, you did.
And I got inside a lot of different companies, hundreds of different companies over the years, and saw how they worked and saw how they didn't work. And decided after my last book came out about Ford's turnaround that it was a lot more satisfying to help companies solve their problems than write about their problems. So I didn't get bit by a spider, but what I did, my secret power, if I have one, is the ability to look and learn and listen. I'm a sponge. And when you've been inside, literally hundreds of companies and seen how their senior leadership are dealing with challenges and how they're taking advantage of opportunities, and you've seen the good and you've seen the bad, you see a lot of things that you can take away from that, hopefully, and help other organizations to do the right things and not do the wrong things.
Yes, totally understood. Now, what's interesting, though, is you said something that I think happens for a lot of people, is many people see something, but yet you decided to do something about it. I mean, it's easy to see, oh, that's broken. That ain't right. I would never do it that way. Why did you make that decision? But yet you said to yourself, instead of just writing about it, you try to help them solve it. Where did that come from?
It was really an accident, Jay. My last book, American Icon, Alan Mulally and the Fight to Save Ford Motor Company, was the story of how Ford became the only American automaker to make it through the Great Recession without going bankrupt and without having to be bailed out by you and I and your listeners. And that was what the book was about. But it was also a book about a management system that Alan Mulally developed at Boeing and brought to Ford and used to change Ford's culture, to make the company able to succeed and to put it back on the road to success. I started getting a lot of calls after that book came out from CEOs and other business leaders who said, read this book, really liked it, wonder if you could come and speak with our team about some of the lessons in this book. So I started doing that while still working as a journalist. And then invariably, after I do that, a few weeks later, I'd get a call from the same company saying, can you actually come and help us implement some of the ideas you talked about? And at the time, and still today, as most people are aware, the newspaper industry is kind of dying this decades-long death. It was. I'll tell you something, Jay.
It does seem slow.
One of the most difficult things to have been.
Yeah.
For the past 10 years, 15 years.
Yeah.
Was a business journalist, a financial journalist who understood how business worked. And to be sitting in a business that was collapsing around you, in which you had no ability to influence the direction of that business. So when I got the opportunity to start helping companies shape their direction and move in a better direction, I leapt at it and I didn't look back. And so for the past 3 or 4 years, I've been doing that. And that led me to my new book, Red Teaming, which is an attempt to find even more powerful systems that companies can use to stress test their strategies, to strengthen their plans, to make better decisions, and, as I put it, to become one of the disruptors in their industry rather than one of the disrupted. Because whether you're a global corporation or you've got a mom and pop store, you are functioning now in a period of unprecedented complexity and disruption in the business environment. You think about the furniture. If you owned a furniture store, if you were a sole proprietor with a furniture store, in Alabama, you right now are competing against Amazon, which just a few weeks ago announced that they are getting into the furniture business.
What? I know this. Sorry, it's just Amazon is like, oh my God, no, not again, not something else. I figured they had all of my budget already, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is again, And that's such an important point, because that really goes to the heart of what red teaming is about, which is not taking your success for granted, for recognizing that just because you're succeeding right now doesn't mean you get a buy, doesn't mean you just have to keep your foot on the accelerator. No, it means that you have to do something different. If you look at what happened with another big disruptor, Google, a year or two ago, when Larry Page sent out the memo to employees announcing that they were doing something really strange, not creating a spin-off, but making Google the spin-off of a new company, Alphabet, he said in his memo to employees, it is no longer enough to simply continually improve our business. That's no longer enough to stay in business, let alone lead in business. We have to make these great leaps forward as a business into new areas, into new markets, into new ways of doing things. Otherwise, someone else will. And that's really one of the things that inspired me to write this current book.
Well, I mean, if I listen to what you just said there, that would be, it can feel daunting. It's like, oh, I don't know, even know if I should try this whole business thing. That seems like a whole lot of extra work that might not necessarily be revenue generating at the beginning. But before we go down that road, one of the things that I still don't quite get, though, specifically about you, is, again, you saw a problem, but many people, you didn't sit on the sidelines. What was the impetus to say, that's enough, I am the one that can do something about, I will do something about this? Was it literally just, okay, an opportunity? Or because there seems to, I think there was something deeper than just, you know, hey, I could, and then the opportunity came there. I think it comes from somewhere else.
You know, I'll tell you, I mean, this may be a strange source to quote on a business conversation, but one quote that stuck with me ever since I read it in the autobiography of Malcolm X is, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem.
Got it.
And I really believe that. And I was very frustrated being in a situation for several years where I didn't have the ability to be part of the solution, even though I could see what needed to be done. And so when I got the opportunity to be part of the solution, that I took it, because I really think that, you know, when I started out as a journalist, I was very idealistic and thought, you know, I could, you know, help change the world by, you know, exposing truth and wrongdoing and et cetera, et cetera. And,
Sure.
and over time, I realized that newspapers had become incredibly dysfunctional and had really kind of ceased to provide the value that they once did.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, I saw that business done right is capable of doing amazing things. You know, like, I don't know how much you know about, like, Chobani yogurt, but there's a great story in Chobani about this guy who comes to the U.S. as a refugee and creates this amazing company that, in a market that didn't even exist, and then uses his company to, like, improve the lives of thousands of people in communities all over the country where he builds his factories and stuff. And he's got a very intentional, you know, way that he goes about doing this. And you know, that's a powerful stuff. And business done right is capable of doing phenomenally good things.
Yeah, I get that. I see that's what I'm talking about. Many, I believe, great businesses were born out of a frustration somewhere, and then the opportunity presents itself. So that makes total sense. Now, We've mentioned the term red teaming, but in the intro, I also mentioned how we can take ideas from other industries or maybe even some uncommon places to be able to solve a problem that we're currently facing. And from what I understand, that the concept of red teaming comes from the U.S. military, U.S. intelligence agency. So help me understand how something from over there can help us in business. Hello there, entrepreneur. This is Jay Massey, and what I want to say to you is that the number one mistake that I have ever made in business, number one, has been waiting too long to do the books, waiting too long to get the bookkeepers, the accountants, the CPAs, the CFOs involved, and I don't want you to make that same mistake. That mistake cost me over 6 figures, and now for a significant discount, you have the ability to get your books together using FreshBooks. So what I want you to do is I want you to go over to gofreshbooks.com/cashflow diary. Again, that's gofreshbooks.com/cashflow diary. FreshBooks is the easy to use software designed to help you, the small business owner, the freelancer, get organized and save time on invoicing, getting paid faster, keeping those books in order so that it becomes a bonus for you to do your taxes as opposed to a burden. Go over to gofreshbooks.com/cashflow diary and get started today. And now let's get back to the rest of the story.
See, that's a great question, Jay. I'm a big believer that you should look for ideas wherever they are. And one of the things that struck me when I'd written this book about Ford Motor Company, I'd started my practice as a consultant, and Ford was doing great at the time. They've since run into a little bit of difficulties that they're working on, but at the time they were doing phenomenal. Mm-hmm. And yet I had a conversation with Bill Ford Jr., the chairman of the company, the great grandson of Henry Ford. And he said, I still have trouble sleeping at night sometimes. And I said, really? Why? I mean, you got Alan, you guys are making record profits. You didn't go bankrupt. You didn't take bailout. People love you. Market share increasing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, yeah, but here's the thing. He said, I know this company, and I know the history of this company, and I know how many times in the past we've let our success go to our head, and how many times we've kind of allowed ourselves to become complacent. And he said, I worry that might happen again. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but someday. So that got me started, Jay, looking for some idea about how companies could kind of institutionalize a way of challenging their institutional thinking, if you will.
You're looking for a system to challenge the system.
Exactly. That's right.
That sounds funny, but okay.
It sounds funny, but that's what I was thinking. Excuse me. And I found what I was looking for in a very unlikely place, which was a zombie movie.
Oh, this is good. My wife is going to appreciate this. This is great.
So I have to start. No offense to your wife, but I'm not a fan of zombie movies.
Me neither.
Yeah, I can't actually stand them most of the time.
Right.
I don't like horror films in general, but several of my friends about 2013 were telling me about the zombie movie World War Z the
Brad Pitt one
that they described to me as the thinking man zombie movie, which to me seemed like a bit of an oxymoron, but but one day I didn't like, I valued these people's opinions, but not enough to actually go to the theater and see the movie. But one day I was sick, and it was about 6 months after the movie had come out, and I was flipping through Amazon on demand, and up popped World War Z as a new release. And I said, I feel like crap. This is probably a good way to kill an afternoon. And started watching it. And in this movie, there's a scene early on where, there's this zombie plague that's sweeping across the world that starts in India. And the only country that isn't brought down by it in the first few days is Israel. And so Brad Pitt, our hero, is sent by what's left of the U.S. government to Jerusalem to figure out what did Israel know that no one else knew that allowed them to protect themselves from the zombie plague. And he's met at the airport by the head of Israeli intelligence, the Mossad, who explains to him that they have this concept that they developed after they almost lost the 1973 Yom Kippur War called the 10th Man Doctrine. And he explains to Brad Pitt that this doctrine requires that when all of their senior security council staff are united in believing that something is true, that there is a requirement that the 10th man on the team has to argue that the opposite is true and put together as compelling an argument as possible that the opposite is true. And he explains how that just like every other country in the world, they received these fantastical sounding reports from India that there was this zombie plague sweeping the earth. And just like every other country in the world, they were inclined to ignore them. But because of this 10th man doctrine, their 10th man said, what if it's true? Why don't we just seal our borders as a precaution? And that's what they do. And it turns out about 5 minutes later that it doesn't matter because the zombies are at the Wailing Wall. But the point was that I found myself thinking, is this real? Do the Israelis really have something like this? Because if they do, That's the cure for what Bill Ford was talking about, right? That's the cure for this sort of institutional complacency that we run into. It's the cure for groupthink. It's a cure for a lot of things that I've seen a lot of companies brought down by. So when I got better, I started calling around and surfing the internet and finally tracked down an Israeli intelligence officer who explained to me that the answer was kind of like, kind of. He said that he'd never heard of the 10th man doctrine, and he has no idea where the author of that book or Hollywood got the 10th man from. But he said, we do have an organization called Ipsa Mitsabra, which I'm told in Aramaic means something approximately on the contrary, it appears that the opposite is true. He says, we have this organization called Ipsa Mitsabra that does exactly what the movie talked about. And it was created after the 1973 Yom Kippur War. Everything else they said was totally true. He said, this organization exists, and its job is not to figure out what Israel's enemies are doing. Its job is not to not to develop a great plan for protecting Israel. Its job is to take whatever the prevailing wisdom is in the Israeli security and military establishment and argue as strongly as possible that it's wrong. Now, it may be right, and it often is. But the point of this is to stress test it, to make sure it's right, to make sure that people aren't missing something. So I thought this was amazing, but I was also surprised because he kept referring to it as our version of red teaming. Now, as I mentioned earlier when we were talking, I used to be I used to cover the high-tech industry during the boom years in the 1990s in Silicon Valley, and I'd heard red teaming referred to as these kind of white-hatted hackers that companies would hire to try to break into their networks to find vulnerabilities so they could patch them before the black-hatted hackers found them. And I said, clearly this isn't what you're talking about. He said, no. There's another type of red teaming. And he said, I don't know why you're talking to me. He said, your country has the best red teaming program there is. The U.S. Army has this amazing red teaming program that we send our people to sometimes to learn in. And so I called the Pentagon up and asked if I could be part of that course. And of course, they told me no. But I'm persistent, Jay, just like I'm sure listeners are, because you can't succeed in business without being persistent.
Right.
And so I kept asking people until I finally got someone to say yes. So I spent the first half of 2015 in a class of phenomenal U.S. Army officers and one Air Force officer going through this course to teach these officers how to become red team leaders and how to lead red teams. And I learned about this amazing process that, as you said, was developed by the military and intelligence communities. And it was developed after 9/11. And it was born out of the same, in this case, very hard-learned lesson that success is a poor teacher. Because our military and intelligence agencies had become complacent. We thought we'd won the Cold War. It appeared we had until recently. We had won very easily the first Persian Gulf War, and we had won very easily the war against Serbia in the Balkans. And so there was a prevailing view that had developed that America's technological superiority and mastery of information had reached the point where we could guarantee victory abroad and security at home for the foreseeable future. And we all learned on September 11, 2001 that wasn't true.
Right. So
one of the things that happened on September 12th, 2001 is the CIA created this new group called the Red Cell that was basically a U.S. version of this Israeli group of basically it was charged with taking whatever the prevailing view was, like the prevailing view that terrorists might hijack planes, but they weren't going to fly them into buildings because why would they do that?
Right.
And it would challenge that and argue the opposite is true, like maybe the fact that we have this intelligence that shows there's a bunch of extremists who are taking flying lessons, but they don't want to learn how to land, might be something we should look into. And then a couple of years later, after our victories in Afghanistan and Iraq had started to unravel before our eyes, the Army had a similar catharsis where they realized, hey, we made a lot of assumptions that have turned out to be really, really wrong. So maybe we should come up with a system that forces us to take a hard look at our plans and strategies so that we can make better decisions too. And all of these kind of concurrent efforts led to red teaming. And that was the program I went and learned how to all about at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas.
Well, the interesting thing about this, other than the fact that it starts with a Brad Pitt movie, is the fact that I think we can see evidences, or at least as you're talking, I'm thinking of company after company where, and they're in an industry where things maybe got complacent. For example, when you mentioned Ford, I think, well, Tesla, right? I start thinking about Tesla today because they definitely are not doing what Ford is doing. Two completely different. They're just coming from two completely different worlds. And then when I start thinking about, again, in transportation, you got the taxis versus Uber, if you will. It's like that industry seemed to be complacent. When it comes to hospitality, obviously the hotels versus the Airbnbs of the world, and even something as simple as restaurants versus food trucks. This seems to be something that every industry should. It almost feels like there should be a new department in all of our businesses that's designed to do this. Like, I feel like Apple could use one of these right now.
They sure could. Absolutely. Yeah. No, you know, everybody needs this. And that's the thing that's been amazing. It's interesting. When I wrote this book and as people started hearing that this book was coming, I thought that primarily this book was going to be of interest to older established companies, that were worried about a new competitor, that were worried about, one of these companies you mentioned. And that's been true, but it's also been surprising to me how much interest I've got from some really cutting edge companies in Silicon Valley that I can't name, but which, are familiar to everybody, that also are very interested in this because they don't take their success for granted.
Right.
And they know, because they disrupted other people, how quickly they can become disrupted too if they don't come up with a system to help them constantly reevaluate their plans and strategies. And it's an important thing. When I say reevaluate, I don't mean second guess yourself. I mean execute when you need to execute, but make sure you bake into your planning process, your strategy process, a system that requires you to periodically, at least, ask yourself, is there a better way to do what we're doing? Is there a better way to, is there some way, are we vulnerable in some way that we don't know? Or is there an opportunity that we're missing? And the beauty of red teaming is it's a systematic way of doing that. So it kind of, in the book, I kind of walk people through how they can do this. And I think that, it's something that works for small companies and for global corporations.
Well, and to that point, what I kind of thinking about right now is, I think someone who maybe not even is in business yet could use this idea, at least, or this concept to possibly find a vulnerability of a company that they might want to disrupt.
That's a fascinating idea, Jay. I hadn't really thought about that, but you're absolutely right. You could use this proactively. And there's a lot of tools in the book that I can think of that would be very helpful in doing that. There's a tool, for instance, that the Army developed called 4 Ways of Seeing that's deceptively simple. And basically what it is you create, a chart that looks at all of the kind of key stakeholders on a given problem. And that problem could be, defeating ISIS, but it could also be the music industry or, the soft serve yogurt industry. Okay. And you basically, and I walk you through step by step how to do this in the book, but you basically have a group of folks look at all of these different constituents and see how they view themselves and how they view each other. And in those different interactions, in those kind of conflicting views of how your customers view you, how your competitors view you, how your customers view your competitors, how your competitors' customers view your competitors, that sort of thing. There's a lot that comes out of that could be very valuable for a new entrant into an industry or into a business niche to figure out where are the points that I could really disrupt the existing companies in this space.
What's interesting about that is, on a very, very simplified level, one of the things that we often do, like in our own business, is we will look at the reviews that a competitor might have for a particular product or service, and it kind of tells us what you just said there. It tells us how at least their customers are viewing their service in some way, shape, or form, and it gives us some insight as to, well, we don't want to do that, or we might want to copy some of that.
Exactly. I mean, if you see that your potential competitors, customers, have a very dim view of some key aspect of their product or service, right there is an opportunity. Right there is a chink in the armor. Right there is a point that you can drive your lever into and put your shoulder to it and push and topple them right there.
Yeah. Yeah, I get it. I like it. So when it comes to like actually implementing this, does the process of red teaming, can it be as simple as a checklist, item that we check in every quarter, or is this something that has to be like, how close does an entrepreneur have to be paying attention if they wanted to do this? Like, is this going to be a whole new department, or is, like, how much work is it to maintain this particular system or something like that?
There's a lot of different ways that you can apply red teaming in your business, and different types of red teams make sense for different sizes of businesses. So the range of it runs the gamut for just learning about these tools and techniques. And applying them as a decision maker, which is very helpful, and it's something you can do just by reading the book. Or we also have classes that teach people how to do this that are based on the Army's classes. In fact, use the same instructors that the Army uses. You can learn these tools and techniques, and they will help you make better decisions. But one of the key concepts of red teaming, Jay, is that red teaming is based on all of this research that's been done over the past several decades into cognitive psychology and human decision making. And what that research tells us time and time again is that we have a really hard time figuring out what we don't know. we have a hard time seeing our own blind spots. So while you can use these tools and techniques by yourself to make better decisions, and they will help you make better decisions, to really get the full benefit of red teaming, you need someone with a different set of eyes to look at your plan with you. And you can do that, again, through a variety of scaled things that range on the high end to, as you suggested, having a standing red team, which is what the military has, and which, what some companies that I've been working with are looking at putting together, where you have a group whose function is to be like that Israeli department in their intelligence agency and kind of just take the organization's plans and strategies and stress test them. But that's something that's probably for a lot larger organizations. On the other end of the spectrum, you can bring in an outside red team facilitator to lead your organization through red teaming analysis of its own strategies or plans. That's a lot simpler thing that companies can do that don't have the resources to have their own red team, and that can be just as effective.
Got it. So when it comes down to it, then, I mean, as I'm thinking about this, I'm just going, because I'm thinking about the smaller entrepreneur right now. That's what's going through my head. I'm like, okay, so does the person let's just say I was trying to form my own little red team. Does the person who's on that team necessarily have to have insight to my business, or is there an advantage to having that person, when you say fresh eyes, to having that person be someone who's maybe possibly in a completely different industry? So by way of describing what I'm thinking, like if a group of entrepreneurs were to get together, they read your book, understand, they get together, but they're not even related or competitive businesses, yet could they be each other's red team in some way, shape, or form?
Wow, that could be really powerful. That's again something we need to talk offline. Maybe we need to go into business together here, because you got some great ideas, Jay. This is it's a great idea. It's really a good idea. Using these tools and techniques, that's absolutely something that you could do, and it would be really helpful. One of the reasons, one of the values, a lot of what I do in my own practice is to provide red team facilitation services. So I have folks who work with me from the military and from who are fully trained red team folks who come in with me, and we don't know the industry that we're going into. We don't know the company we're going into, and that is actually an advantage because when you come in with preconceived ideas, then you're kind of blinded to the same thing that folks in the company are blinded to. But we don't do the analysis. We simply facilitate the analysis, because here's the thing: is if you don't know the industry, then you ask a lot of stupid questions too, and you miss a lot of things that someone who has experience would get. And it's also very easy to dismiss the findings of a red team that's from outside your organization and just say, oh, those are the consultants, they don't know what they're talking about. So what we find is a lot more valuable is we come in and we'll work with the leaders of a company we'll run the exercises, but they're the ones who draw the conclusions and who gain the insights. And our job is simply to ask the tough questions. And that's very valuable because, and this is, I'm thinking, tying this back to your idea of a group of business leaders doing this, the value in that is that we see things that they don't because we're coming in with a fresh set of eyes. But they're the ones that are going, oh, well, the answer to that question is this. They're the ones who are generating the answers. So then they can't dismiss their own answers, right? So that's the value in that kind of inside-outside approach. One of the big challenges of red teams that exist in the military and intelligence world that you hear about a lot is walking this fine line between being inside and informed, in other words, fully aware of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats the organization faces, and outside and independent, and in other words, and able to ask tough questions and think differently about things. So that one way to do that, like I said, is what I just described. And oftentimes what I tell my clients is this is tough love for companies, as a way to think of it.
Yeah, I mean, almost an intervention to some degree, because that is definitely, I can think, a few years back, a red team could have saved me a few $100,000 of mistakes. So I'm just thinking that this concept, I like it, and being able to systemize a way to question the unquestionable, the foregone conclusion. This is the way it is. This is the way it's supposed to be. This is the way it's always going to be. Is something that I can't see. I mean, it almost to a degree, it's like, I feel like there should be a family version of this so that moms and dads could say, I'm serious, man, because there are just so many things that we consider to be foregone conclusions. That's just the way it is. I think about cooking when someone is learning to cook and if certain things are done certain ways. Well, why is it done that way? Why do we cut the ends of things off? Why do we use this particular oil? And when we don't question those things, we leave ourselves vulnerable, and we don't even realize it, and we think everything's okay. And that's the dangerous part, is when you think everything's okay, you may think you're on solid ground, but if you don't have a process for being sure of that, or at least have something in place, you get blindsided, and that's a devastating feeling.
Absolutely, Jay. I mean, that's the thing, is you can use these ideas in your own life. I do. Because, we've all had these experiences where we do something that we come with an idea, and the idea seems great. And we think about, how wonderful everything's going to be when this idea that we've come up with that's so great works out. And we fall in love with the idea. Right. And then we execute it, and it turns out not to be so great. And then we look back and we're like, why didn't I see that? It was so obvious. It was right in front of me. That was the stupidest thing in the world. Why did I do that? So rather than have that conversation with yourself as you're slapping your head 2 weeks later, why not have it beforehand so that you can save yourself from that head slap moment that can be very costly to you, both as an individual and as an organization. That's where the power of red teaming really lies.
Indeed. Here's what I know. I know that the people who have listened this far, they are enjoying this conversation. They want it to continue. They may even are at that point where like, I need to know more about this red team thing. I got to get one. What's going to be the best way for them to catch up with you, Bryce? Find out more about what you guys got going on, and so that they can take some next steps.
So the first thing is they can read my book, Red Teaming: How Your Business Can Conquer the Competition by Challenging Everything, which they can get wherever books are sold, in stores or online, wherever you prefer. Audiobook, ebook too available. They can go to my website, brycehoffman.com, BryceHoffman.com. And they can go to my practice's website if they want to as well to find out more about what we offer, which is redteamthinking.com.
Excellent. Now, as we end, I've got a final question for you because I'm really curious to know. Let's pretend that someone who's been listening they're standing on that edge, the precipice. They are ready to throw their hat into the ring. In fact, Bryce, they're standing in front of the superhero outfit store, about ready to put on their cape and tights, and they're going to make this thing happen for themselves. Now,
yes,
as you know, like I know, anytime we make decisions like that, oftentimes we have a little friendly or not so friendly visitor who tends to remind us in the form of a voice of what we can't do, why it won't work, how it doesn't happen. And for some people, they're even related to that voice. So my question is as follows. Let's pretend that they're going to actually follow through this time. They're going to go out there and do what needs to be done. What would you tell them to do?
I think you hit the nail on the head, Jay, a few minutes ago when you raised the issue of just asking why. What is wrong with asking why? Why is this true? Why are we doing things this way? Why has it always been done this way? Why couldn't we do things a different way? Why is one of the most powerful words in the English language. And there's no harm in asking why. That's one of the things that I tell my clients a lot of times is just because you are red teaming your strategy or plan doesn't mean there's anything wrong with your strategy or plan. It may be the best possible strategy in the world, but you won't know that until you really subject it to stress testing and scrutiny. And then you'll be sure. So there's no danger in asking why. There's only upside.
Yeah, totally understood. I completely get it. I definitely appreciate the research, the work that you've been doing. I appreciate the fact that you care about businesses enough to be a part of the solution. And I thank you for taking the time to share your insight, knowledge, and wisdom here with us today at the Cashflow Diary, sir.
Really enjoyed speaking with you, Jay.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you know what time it is. It's time for you to move at the speed of instruction. What does that mean? That means BryceHoffman.com. That means RedTeamThinking.com. That means go pick up the book, read it, most importantly, do it, because I know you heard the epiphanies that were just revealed, but more importantly than that, if we are going to be attacked by zombies, you now know how to be prepared. With all of that being said, ladies and gentlemen, it's been fun talking to you guys today. I look forward to talking to you soon. Until next time.